Good afternoon and welcome to the Midday News. Here's what we have in the bulletin. Government clears the air on Prime Minister foregoing controversial salary increase. Taxi Association warns new Transport Minister it's not business as usual. And later in sports, under 20 reggae girls to play Dominican Republic later this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Shane Masters and here are the details. The Transport Operators Development Sustainable Services TODS has welcomed new Transport Minister Darrell Vaz, but warns that it will not be business as usual within the sector. The group says there are several issues and changes to the order of business that await his attention. Kerry-Ann Simpson tells us more.
No honeymoon, no rest time for you, sir.
That warning from President of the Transport Operators Development Sustainable Services TODS Edgerton Newman to newly appointed Transport Minister Darrell Vaz. Mr. Newman says with Mr. Vaz's track record, he's confident the sector will be transformed.
Darrell have the energy and the strength to move. And I want to welcome Darrell to the noble sector that is suffering the pangs of hell.
Mr. Newman, however, was quick to highlight one concern.
But I always have a problem with transport hiding under other ministries. I always have a problem with that. And that is why we are where we are as a transport sector.
And Mr. Vaz was put to task mere hours after his appointment.
First order of business, fare increase. Second order, furnitures on our thoroughfares, bus stops, lay-bys, taxi stand. And the most important one, a relationship between the transport sector and the security force.
In the meantime, Mr. Newman has pledged to give all the support needed to help transform the sector from where it currently is to where it needs to be. Kerry-Ann Simpson for TVJ News.
The Prime Minister is to continue to receive the salary he was getting before the announced increase. Under the Public Sector Compensation Review, the Prime Minister's salary was to increase from $9.16 million to $22.3 million effective April 1, 2022. Prime Minister Andrew Holness at a news briefing on Monday announced that he would not be taking up the increase. Now, Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark says the Prime Minister's salary has been kept at the old figure.
What the Prime Minister asked is that the scale for Prime Minister remain as it is. So that is the salary scale. This is not an individual Andrew Holness decision. He has asked that the salary scale for Prime Minister remain unchanged.
Minister with responsibility for information, Robert Morgan, says the decision to hold the Prime Minister's salary unchanged also affects past and future holders of the office.
I believe that it is binding both past and present, because pensions are also connected to the salary. So past and present and future would be tied to it.
Both ministers were addressing this morning's post-cabinet press briefing. And Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark says he stands ready to meet with public sector groups to discuss issues affecting them following the salary adjustments to public sector workers. There have been complaints from some public sector unions that despite assurances from the Finance Ministry, several outstanding matters still remain. When asked when the issues of anomalies and discrepancies will be addressed, Dr. Clark defended the ministry's approach. Now, President of the Jamaica Teachers Association, Lasagna Harrison, has stated that she wrote to the Finance Ministry on May 17 requesting a meeting. However, to date, she has not received a response. And it's time for a break. Stay with us, more stories when we return. Welcome back to the Midday News. A well affected by salt water intrusion is causing concern for residents in Portland who point to another foreign matter in the water source. Now, the minister responsible for the environment says that well will be abandoned as the government moves to find more water sources for the parish. But he warns the issue is a feature of the persistent drought. Krista Campbell has that story.
The driest 6 months in Jamaica's history ended in March 2023, and as drought conditions worsen, Minister with responsibility for the environment and climate change, Matthew Samuda, warns it will give rise to other issues. One of those issues, saltwater intrusion in water sources like wells, is already cause for concern in some areas. In Portland, residents say there are issues with the Sherwood Forest Zion Hill well.
It's not only salt water, but it brings red mud and it destroys people's equipment in their homes. And this must have been happening for more than 30 years.
If you have wells that are giving you a salt content above a particular level, eventually the Water Commission would have to put in a system called a reverse osmosis system, which would extract the salt.
But Mr. Samuda says reverse osmosis is very energy intensive, and so the National Water Commission cannot afford to do it on a large scale. It's why the government is spending millions to find alternative water sources.
We have met with 4 companies that have technology that we didn't have. One has already started working in the hills of Portland to identify every single water source to ensure that we manage the total water resources of the parish and find the wells that can be extracted.
But as weather patterns shift, causing Westmoreland to be experiencing the level of rainfall Portland used to get, he says it's becoming harder to find additional water sources.
Because of the nature of your geography, even when you do get the rain, the water goes down so deep, it is very difficult to extract. The cost of extracting from an over 1,000-foot well would cost us more in electricity to extract from that one well than the entire Portland NWC bills would pay.
He says the changing weather patterns is also behind a different type of drought than the island, particularly Portland, is accustomed to.
So drought that we're used to in Jamaica is generally considered meteorological. It doesn't mean you get less rainfall. When you get to hydrological drought, it's when your rivers start to be impacted. It starts to affect the fish in the river, it starts to affect the charging of the aquifers, it affects soil quality. You enter the hydrological drought. The last time Jamaica saw hydrological drought was 2014. Portland didn't see hydrological drought during that period.
He says it's why come June, Portland will be getting the first 3,000 of the over 50,000 water tanks and guttering systems the Prime Minister announced to improve rainwater harvesting across the island. Krista Campbell, TVJ News.
The Portland police are investigating the circumstances surrounding the double murder of a man and a woman in the parish last evening. 28-year-old Shade Pink and 23-year-old Keno James, both of Port Antonio addresses, were among a group of persons playing a game of dominoes on Tuesday sometime after 11 p.m. It's reported that a car drove up and a gunman exited and opened fire on the group. After the shooting subsided, the two were found suffering from bullet wounds. They were rushed to hospital where they were pronounced dead. The woman was said to be in an advanced stage of pregnancy. It's not clear if the deceased were the intended targets. 2 employees of the National Solid Waste Management Authority were this morning shot in Portsmouth, Portsmouth, St. Catherine. The wounded men were transported to hospital by the police. One later died. It's understood that about 10 o'clock, the men were on a truck collecting garbage in a section of Portsmouth when they were attacked. Further details are not yet available. And it's now time for the Business Minute.
The Bank of Jamaica says the foreign currency market has remained stable over the last year. Governor of the Central Bank, Richard Biles, says the Jamaican dollar has gained ground on the U.S. currency so far this year compared to the first 5 months of 2022.
At May 18, 2023, the Jamaican dollar appreciated against the U.S. dollar on a year-over-year basis by 0.4%. This is compared to a depreciation of 3.3% recorded over the same period a year earlier. In this context, For the calendar year to date, BOJ sold approximately $398.3 million via its Be-Fix-It facility, and a further $10 million to selected public enterprises.
Further afield, Netflix is starting to crack down on users who share passwords despite not living together. In a letter to subscribers Tuesday, the streaming service is now offering two alternatives. They can transfer a profile to a new member and pay for that person, or add an extra member for about $8 a month. Netflix says it allowed password sharing in the past to fuel growth, and that led to some 100 million households doing so. Now it wants to focus on its revenue as opposed to its subscriber base. And that's it for the Business Minute. I'm Hal Shane Burke.
And here's a preview of what's coming up in this evening's Health Report.
In this evening's health report, we look at noise trauma.
Move away from the speaker. You don't have to be the person that is standing right up against the speaker or the speaker system, because that's where you're more likely to be exposed to the damage. Outdoor settings are better than indoor settings, right? Because sound is going to reverberate off of walls and amplify upon itself depending on how the waveform is interfacing with each other. So outdoor settings are better than indoor settings. Further away from the sound source is better than near to the sound source. And if you have that kind of pull with the event organizers, ask them to turn it down. I am a big advocate. I am the nerdy person who will walk around with earplugs in my ears. But the other part of that is that they have to be well applied.
That's the health report in Primetime News at 7. And now for today's healthy living tip. Here are ways to protect your hearing. Turn the volume down. Walk away from the loud noise. Take breaks from the noise. Avoid loud, noisy activities and places. And use hearing protection.
Time now for the top regional and international stories.
In the region, Ecuador's National Electoral Council has announced that early presidential elections would be held on August 20. President Guillermo Lasso dissolved the National Assembly by decree last week and brought forward the vote scheduled for 2025. Lasso's decision to dissolve the opposition-led legislature came as lawmakers tried to impeach him for not stopping a deal between the state-owned oil transport company and a private tanker company, accusations he denies. On the international scene, legislators in the U.S. state of South Carolina have passed a bill that would ban nearly all abortions around 6 weeks of pregnancy. The bill is expected to be signed into law by the state Republican Governor Henry McMaster, but it will now face legal challenges. The majority of southern U.S. states have curtailed abortion rights since the Supreme Court overturned the nationwide right to abortion last year. And the U.S. has distanced itself from an incursion into Russia, which Moscow says ended in defeat of armed insurgents who entered from Ukraine. Parts of the border region of Belgorod came under attack on Monday in one of the largest cross-border raids since Russia invaded Ukraine last year. Russia later revealed pictures of abandoned or damaged Western military vehicles, including U.S.-made Humvees. The U.S. insisted it did not encourage or enable strikes inside of Russia. And those were the top regional and international stories. I'm Carrie Simpson.
Thanks, Carrie. We head to a quick break. When we come back, Jordan Ford will have your midday sports report.